All of Christ's followers spread throughout the Mediterranean, preaching his message. But the apostles are the men on earth who actually walked with Jesus himself.
There were all of these different cities that had healthy Christian churches in them. But the only one that actually had an apostle at its head was the church in Rome, which was where Peter was centered.
An introduction to 1 Peter. The Apostle Peter identifies himself as the writer of his two inspired letters, 1 and 2 Peter. Peter wrote his first letter from Babylon about 62 to 64 CE. Peter used Silvanus, also known as Silas, as his secretary. Silvanus was likely the Silas who was earlier associated with the Apostle Paul. Peter addressed his first letter to anointed Christians in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Christians in those lands were experiencing many trials. An introduction to 2 Peter. Peter wrote his second letter about 64 CE, shortly after he wrote his first letter. At the time, he may still have been in Babylon or its vicinity. Peter's second letter encourages anointed Christians to make their heavenly calling sure, to guard against false teachers, and to pay attention to the prophetic word. 2 Peter contains 3 chapters. Chapter 1 discusses Christ's transfiguration, which gave Peter, James, and John a preview of Christ's glory and kingdom power. The transfiguration made the prophetic word more sure, so Christ's followers should pay attention to it as to a lamp shining in a dark place. In chapter 2, Peter warns us that false teachers would arise and bring in destructive sects. Those deceivers, who began to appear in the first century, would face divine judgment as did the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. Did you know? When Peter wrote his second letter, he knew that his death was near. But instead of being overly concerned about himself, he continued to obey Jesus' loving command, "Feed my little sheep." Chapter 3 points forward to Christ's presence and kingdom power. Concerning that time, Peter foretold that there would be ridiculers who would deliberately ignore that Jehovah had destroyed a wicked world once before in Noah's day. Peter then points to God's promise of a figurative new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness will dwell. In the meantime, God's people should stick to the holy writings and engage in deeds of godly devotion.
In the first century, any follower of Christ is seen as a threat to the Roman Empire and hunted for his beliefs. Because Rome is the capital and the center of the empire, the Bishop of Rome becomes the leader of the other bishops, a position that will eventually become known as Pope. In the 200 years after Peter's crucifixion, bishops and their followers continue to be persecuted and executed by Roman emperors, until an unlikely hero emerges.
Constantine was a great military commander, and when it was his turn to become a junior emperor, he decided to fight his competition.
Constantine, the pagan commander of Rome's Western army, declares war on the commander of the East to decide who will be sole emperor of Rome. And the day before the battle, he has a startling vision.
He looks up and he sees the sign of the cross.
And he thought it was a promise from Jesus that he would win the battle.
Constantine does win the battle, and the new emperor is forever changed by his vision.
He decides he's going to be a Christian.
One of his first official acts as the first Christian emperor of Rome is to issue the Edict of Milan. This not only makes Christianity legal, but favored.
This is the big one. For the first time, a Roman emperor decided to ally with the church. That meant the whole of the known world was at the disposal of the church.
As Constantine moves Christianity from outlawed to exalted, church and state become intertwined.
Constantine saw in Christianity a way of uniting the empire, a new ideology that would give everybody the same God, the same moral values.
Constantine, by legalizing Christianity, opened up a space where the Bishop of Rome could become a permanent fixture on both the spiritual and the political scene.
What Constantine did is take the bishops who had been previously persecuted and make them his agents. He treated them like members of his administration. So now he would take the Bishop of Egypt, the Bishop of Jerusalem, the Bishop of Athens, and state power would go through them.
Bishops become important people in the local community. If people have disputes with each other, they are as likely to go to a bishop to get it sorted out.
You had to go to him to get the food supply. That made him enormously wealthy and enormously influential.
Constantine gives Romans a political and financial incentive to convert to Christianity. He gives Christians tax breaks and makes churches tax exempt.
Constantine is the reason why churches are now in the U.S. tax-free entities. Constantine is the reason why churches have this special status.
From the time of Constantine, the church had been the ally of the emperor, and the church became the ally of rulers as rulers became Christian. There was no feeling that there should be a separation between church and state. Church and state worked together.
To honor his newfound faith, Constantine commissioned spectacular building projects in Christ's name throughout the empire. Among the most famous of them, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of the holiest places in Christendom. The slab on the floor is the place where they say Jesus was originally buried.
But almost as soon as Christians are free from Roman persecution, they begin fighting with each other.
The biggest problem during this time was doctrine. In some people's eyes, Jesus was born of a woman, he can't be divine, and there's big questions about whether is Jesus a human, is he divine, is he both?
You would think, wow, this is kind of hair-splitting doctrinal difference here, but there, some people were willing to kill you for that, you see. So Christians willing to kill other Christians for those differences.
To unite the empire, Constantine must gather his bishops under one church, or risk having the Christian empire he's built come crashing down. Under Constantine and the Bishop of Rome, Christianity has gone from an outlawed sect to the ruling force of the Western world.
Constantine was both the head of the state and he was the head of the church. He was still a Roman, and in the old Roman religion, the emperor was also the chief priest. Constantine definitely took that approach to his faith, rather than, what we would now think of as more of a separation of powers.
But despite Christianity's new political advantage, after centuries of being persecuted for not believing in the Roman gods, Christians are now killing each other over disputes in church doctrine.
Constantine needed a way to bind this empire together. He conquered it, but it was crumbling.
He was angry, and he said, look, these things you're quarreling about are just trivial. I stopped the persecutions, You should be grateful. So he called a council to unify the church.
The Council of Nicaea is the first time you bring all of the bishops together and have them start to talk to each other.
The council marks the first meeting of senior church leaders, the foundation of the Pope's College of Cardinals today.
The bishops were commissioned to write what a Christian should believe.
Constantine manages to get the bishops to agree on one singular statement of faith, still used to unify Christians today: the Nicene Creed.
The creed says, we believe in Jesus Christ, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and the council decides that Jesus is fully human and fully divine.
Constantine declared, if you sign it, you're a Christian and you're part of us. And if you don't, you're excommunicated, you're out. You'll probably go to hell. So this became the battling cry for Catholics throughout the world.
With the church unified after Nicaea, Constantine looks to further stabilize the religious foundation of his empire. He establishes a second hub of church power in the east. He names the new capital after himself and calls it Constantinople.
There's a bit of back and forth between Rome and Constantinople.
The Christians in the East tend to look at the Christians in the West as just being barbarians. They would say that the Catholics in the West baptized their children in wolf saliva. The Westerners tend to look at the East as being not strong, effete.
The hierarchy of clergy under bishops who reported to the Bishop of Rome had been working well. But now, with Constantinople acting as a second capital, there is a second bishop who believes that he should be in charge.
There were disputes between the Bishop of Rome, the Bishop of Constantinople. Each one saw himself as a very powerful leader, and each one was competing with the others for authority.
Despite Constantine's best efforts to unify his empire under one church, the East and West remain at odds. 7 years after the Council of Nicaea, Constantine dies, leaving the church still divided and Rome without a strong military leader. For over 100 years following Constantine's death, Rome is under attack from pagan barbarians to the north. After a series of invasions and bloody clashes, the barbarians overthrow the last emperor of Rome. The Eternal City, once home to 2 million people, is reduced to less than 30,000. Once the political and spiritual center of the empire, Rome is now almost abandoned and stays that way for nearly 200 years.
Rome is not a good place to live. It's very dangerous. The standard of living is very low.
Rome was virtually gone. The church's center was in Constantinople.
As Rome falls and Constantinople flourishes, much of the church's terminology becomes Greek instead of Latin. The Bishop of Rome begins to be referred to with the Greek word for father, papas, or pope. During this period of barbarian invasions, there is no centralized government left in Rome. The church is the only institution capable of addressing the needs of its suffering community.
This is a time when the Pope is not just the head of the church, he's also the ruler of Rome.
The people of Rome were enormously dependent on the church as a state. So not as a church that oversaw the relationship between God and man, but as a church that oversaw food, water, safety.
During an Easter procession, the Lombards viciously attack Pope Leo III.
Their faction wrestles him to the ground and cut off his tongue, but he lives through it.
Pope Leo III realizes that he needs protection, and with no army of his own, he must make an alliance. He chooses the most powerful king in the Western Empire, Charles the Great of France, better known as Charlemagne. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III calls Charlemagne to Rome, where he crowns him Holy Roman Emperor.
Charlemagne took on himself the role of defender of the faith.
The moment that Leo III crowns Charlemagne is really important because what it does, it puts the church back together with the empire. If you have the Pope crowning a king, that means the Pope is giving that earthly king temporal and divine power.
Pope Leo III's decision to crown Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor marks the papacy's conscious pivot away from the Eastern Church.
The relations between Rome and Eastern Christians had not been good for a while.
Charlemagne, in his view, he was now the only legitimate Christian emperor left. As he grew in power, developed a very standoffish relationship with the ruler of Constantinople.
And that really is the start of the schism between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church.
In the 2 centuries after Charlemagne and Pope Leo III unite Western Europe under the papacy in Rome, the eastern part of the empire breaks off and begins to call itself the Greek Orthodox Church under the Patriarch in Constantinople.
The word Catholic originally meant universal. Until the 11th century, there was just the one church. It wasn't until the church at Constantinople broke off from its allegiance to the Pope that we begin to see references to the Roman Catholic Church as no longer meaning universal, but meaning the church which is centered at Rome.
"200 years after the historic alliance between Charlemagne and Pope Leo III, Pope Urban II rules the Western Empire from Rome, and the Patriarch reigns over the East from Constantinople, until Constantinople finds itself facing an imminent threat.
Islam is the superpower of the medieval period. They're the wealthiest, the most sophisticated. If I was betting at the time, I would have certainly bet that Islam and the Islamic empires were the wave of the future.
Muslim armies have been steadily making their way through the Arabian Peninsula, conquering new lands and uniting them under Islam. They had long since conquered Jerusalem and were headed for the next Christian stronghold.
Muslims had swept through what we would now say is modern Turkey, and really getting fairly close to Constantinople itself.
When you can almost see Muslims across the water, it's time to find the Christians who are left to help you.
Emperor Alexius I of Constantinople writes to Pope Urban II in Rome, pleading for aid against the Muslims.
Alexios is asking a few hundred knights to help him defend his city. What he gets is something entirely different. Urban II is in part responding to an appeal from the Emperor Alexios. As the leader of the church, he's looking to improve the spiritual well-being of his people, but he's also a politician.
Seeing an opportunity to unite Eastern and Western Christians and solidify his place as their leader, Pope Urban II calls an emergency gathering of clergy, knights, and townspeople.
It was probably the most famous speech made during the Middle Ages. Urban told about the plight of Christians in the East who had had their lands conquered, horrible mutilations of nuns and clergy and pilgrims because of their faith. And what Urban did was very clever. Rather than just ask them to go and fight for the East, he also asked them to go all the way to Jerusalem to restore the lands that had been taken by Muslims.
The response is amazing. People shout, Deus vult, God wills it. And this is the moment that crusading begins across Western Europe.
Pope Urban was an example of a new kind of pope. Austere, powerful personality, the papacy as a self-consciously rallying, purifying, inspiring force, calling on people to do something extraordinary for God. And it had enormous imaginative power.
For the first time, the Pope, a religious leader, once at the mercy of barbarians and dependent upon kings for protection, raises an army and commands a war. The Eastern Church calls upon the Pope in the West to help them fight off the incoming Muslim armies. Pope Urban II sees this as an opportunity to reunite Christians and restore the reign of the Roman Catholic Church.
There's a tribal aspect to it, that our tribe is being attacked, just as we still do today. 9/11, someone attacks the United States, people are lined up at induction centers to go off and fight.
When he calls for the First Crusade, Pope Urban II solidifies his role as a world power. The Pope is no longer just a spiritual guide, but a commander at the helm of an army. A zealous fleet of nearly 40,000 starts the long march east towards Jerusalem.
The Crusades were first and foremost an act of piety. The Crusades are the only case I know of in human history in which you have thousands of warriors marching thousands of miles deep into enemy territory for no good strategic reason.
The warriors begin their crusade through the Rhineland in what will become modern-day Germany. The destruction in the name of Christ is waged against all non-believers in their path.
One of the terrible things that this group does is that they attack the Jews of the Rhineland. They decide that the Jews are the people who are responsible for the killing of Christ, and that if they are going to act against the enemies of the church, they will do so at home before they do so abroad.
The Rhineland massacres are only the beginning of what will become a century of religious warfare at the command of the Pope.
Once the First Crusade gets into Asia Minor, it's into Muslim-held territory. The Crusaders managed to capture the town of Nicaea, and then they fight a great battle against the Muslims, and they capture Antioch.
Emboldened by their string of unlikely victories, the Crusaders are now convinced beyond all doubt that God is on their side as they prepare to deliver the crown jewel of Christianity back to their Pope, Jerusalem.
Their Lord, Jesus Christ, had had his lands taken, and it was the Crusaders' responsibility, therefore, as his servants, to come to his aid to restore those lands.
The Crusaders were extremely violent. They would attack people in their homes. They were mass rapes, killing of children. They would set fire to entire residential neighborhoods. It was horrible.
They've succeeded in liberating the city of Jerusalem from the hands of the Muslims. And this, for generations, will be hailed and recognized.
After 400 years as a Muslim temple, the Crusaders replaced the crescent atop the sacred Dome of the Rock with a cross and turn it into a church.
Partly motivated by religious zeal, partly motivated by simple desire for conquest. The Crusaders were exclusionary. Muslims were not allowed to live in Christian areas.
Jerusalem remains in Christian hands until 1187, when Saladin, the hero of Islam, draws together the Muslim Near East to recover the Holy Land.
As the Muslims close in on Jerusalem once again, Pope Urban III realizes that in his predecessor's quest to defend Christianity, he may have invited its demise. In 1187, after only 88 years under Christian rule, Saladin's Muslim army defeats the Crusaders and reclaims the Holy Land for Islam.
When Saladin recovers Jerusalem in 1187, some of his people suggest they should destroy the Holy Sepulchre. It is Christ's tomb. And he says, no, let's let it survive. Saladin is a man very much aware of the power of mercy.
His rule was very different from that of the Crusaders. Saladin was motivated by his belief that Christians, Jews, and Muslims can and should be able to live peacefully.
In March of 2000, Pope John Paul II apologizes for the Crusades and the violent campaigns of his predecessors.
We are asking forgiveness for the use of violence in the name of truth, and for the attitudes of indifference and hostility taken towards other religions.
For all of the beauty and creativity that we think of now as the Renaissance, a lot of that work was financed by corruption. You want the Sistine Chapel? The Sistine Chapel was paid for by bribery. A lot of that beauty, the flip side of it was brutality.
The church is very human, made up of sinful people who are striving to live a life according to the Spirit, and yet we fall. And big men with big titles fall.
We always have to remember that this history of the papacy is not always a good history.
Behind the iconic images of the 15th and 16th centuries lie webs of scandal, violence, and depravity surrounding the popes of that time.
The thing you have to really remember about this moment in history is there is no other game in town but Catholicism. The higher up you get in this organization, which is a kind of multinational by this time, the more important your influence is. And the Pope is the CEO of this global institution.
And Italy at this time was an unbelievably dangerous place to be an important person.
Throughout the Renaissance, the Church amasses an exorbitant amount of wealth through property holdings. Churches act as local banks. They hand out loans, collect tithes, and sit on vast reserves of gold and silver reaped through political alliances. With the Church's swelling wealth comes immense power, and Europeans stop at nothing to gain favor with the Church and garner influence within it.
If you read Shakespeare and you read Jacobean drama and stuff like that, Italy at the time becomes this shorthand for evil and grotesque double-dealing and poisoning.
Italy at this time is, of course, not a country. She's a set of little city-states. And the basic tool of loyalty in all of these places is family. Family. You know, the mafia doesn't grow out of Italy for no reason at all.
The families that control these city-states are in constant competition with one another for money, land, and most importantly, power.
The most important city-states were Milan, run by the Sforza family, Florence, which came under the domination of the Medici family, and there was Rome, which was the kingdom in which the king was the Pope.
By the 1470s, the Italian families had been embroiled in power struggles for generations. And the newly appointed Pope Sixtus IV, a member of the ambitious Della Rovere family, feels an imminent threat from one of his rivals.
There's conflict with the Medicis.
The Medici family, they were kind of a messy family. I think about them as being the dynasty of the Renaissance.
The Medicis had interfered with some business dealings of the Della Roveres.
One of Pope Sixtus's many nephews is a vicious nutcase. Says the answer to our problems is get rid of the Medici, get rid of this headache.
This was just a stupid idea. I mean, the Medici clan was huge.
The Pope agreed to the murder of Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother.
The Della Roveres recruit members of the Pozzi family, another Italian banking empire.
The second wealthiest family in Florence was the Pozzi, who resented the Medici because they felt that the Medici had unfair advantages.
On Sunday, April 26, 1478, the assailants attacked the Medici brothers at a mass in Florence.
The conspirators attacked and killed the brother and attacked Lorenzo, who escaped.
Lorenzo musters his troops. They quickly capture the main conspirators and the murderers, and they're summarily executed.
And on August 6, 1492, just 3 days after Columbus set sail for the New World, with the wealthiest Italian families entangled in murderous rivalries, and the power to rule all of Europe and the Americas at stake, 23 cardinals embark upon one of the most ruthless conclaves in Vatican history. In August of 1492, 23 cardinals must elect a new pope who will lead more Catholics than the world has ever known.
The cardinals will live in the Sistine Chapel until they finally decide who's pope. So it's a very intense hothouse.
Every powerful Italian family has a seat at the table and a horse in the race.
The two most powerful factions at this conclave, one was led by a cardinal named Ascanio Sforza. Sforza's primary rival was Giuliano della Rovere.
And Giuliano della Rovere, the nephew of Sixtus IV, the vicious pope who called for the violent removal of his rival, has inherited his uncle's blind ambition.
Della Rovere had a very powerful personality.
He's very smart and he's very ruthless.
Determined to swing the conclave in his favor, Giuliano della Rovere begins handing out bribes in exchange for votes.
Although the matter may finally be about God and heaven, this is an earthly institution and it's run by men and it has a power structure attached to it. And whenever in history you introduce power structures, you will find forms of corruption.
But while della Rovere and Sforza wheel and deal center stage, another candidate begins to form his own campaign behind the scenes.
Rodrigo Borgia was both an insider and a dark horse at the same time.
Rodrigo Borgia is a Spanish cardinal who had steadily risen through the ranks of the church since he was a teenager.
He had been through 5 papacies, the most important, powerful member of the Vatican bureaucracy. But he was a Spaniard. That makes him an outsider.
But despite being an outsider, Borgia is an experienced Vatican politician. On day 4 of the conclave, the Spanish cardinal makes his move.
In the middle of the night, 6 mules loaded with silver leave the Borgia Palace in Rome and trot along the streets to the palace of Ascanio Sforza, cardinal and one of his rivals. And it is absolutely clear that somewhere underneath that, a deal has been done. Rodrigo Borgia bought his way into the papacy.
Borgia's first order of business as Pope Alexander VI is to surround himself with a network of people he trusts. Like many powerful men of the era and today, Borgia places his children in the highest ranks of his council.
He had some of his children marry important princes in other dominions. He made his one son a cardinal and gave him all kinds of church income.
It is a story of nepotism, really. People thought, how could these kind of venal arrivists take over the Vatican City?
Flanked by his children, Pope Alexander VI prepares to build a Borgia dynasty.
The hierarchy of the church is about making sure that the papacy stays powerful. And we have a global multinational company operating. It needs a vast administration.
Pope Alexander VI is the father, almost the creator, of modern diplomacy. He introduced the practice of stationing the prototypical ambassadors at the city-states to live there. And then he started doing that with the major North European capitals.
Each of his ambassadors live amongst the clergy in their various stations and report back to the Vatican. Just weeks into his papacy, Alexander VI has consolidated his power across Europe. And he does not intend to stop there.
The New World is discovered, and Columbus is instructed to write letters to the Pope, the sort of chatty little travelogues about all the things that he's seeing and who the natives are and what they look like and how fascinating they are. He's filling in the Pope in order to soften up the Pope towards the Spanish perspective. And because the Portuguese and the Spanish are spatting about who is going to own what.
This got very ugly and very tense, and it seemed likely to result in war.
They turned to the papacy, to Alexander VI, to adjudicate the international boundary.
It's the Pope who literally draws the line on the map of the ocean.
Everything east of that line belonged to Portugal. And that's how Brazil came to be a Portuguese colony.
On May 12, 1493, Pope Alexander VI issues the Inter Cetera. The First Papal Order grants the majority of the New World to his homeland.
The Spanish have the lion's share, and blow me down, but if the Pope doesn't also get a Spanish bride for his second son.
The Papal Order, which leads to hundreds of years of pillaging and destruction of native lands, is still controversial today. The world will soon learn that all of Borgia's accomplishments come with a price. One of the most salacious stories to come out of the Borgia papacy is the Banquet of the Chestnuts.
The story is that it was a party at which dozens of prostitutes were invited and everybody got naked and all sorts of things happened, somehow involving chestnuts. And supposedly Pope Alexander was present.
Though the tale of the banquet is met with doubt, the story of the Pope's mistress who took up residency in the Vatican is undisputed.
Giulia Farnese was a beautiful young member of an important Italian family. And when Rodrigo became Pope, among the young men he appointed cardinals, one was Giulia's brother. This was a way of buying the girl. I'll make you a cardinal, you let me have her as a mistress. Rodrigo was 60 at the time, she was 15. She lived in the papal palace with the other young Borgias. He had at least one child with her.
To us, that looks like a bundle of contradictions. How can you be conventionally pious and yet be living this kind of contradiction? It's a kind of Latin distinction between the man and the office. People manage to respect the office while being aware that the people who occupy it were extremely fallible.
There was a sense in which sin was automatic. Human beings would sin, and if they didn't sin, they wouldn't need the church to help them get out of it.
And one way the Vatican funds the Pope's sins is with the sale of indulgences. Fees paid to the church in exchange for salvation.
If you know you're going to sin, maybe you could buy ahead of time a pardon.
Despite their moral questionability, indulgences pay for many of the treasures we've come to associate with the modern church.
Borgia exemplifies all the things about the Renaissance papacy that we both deplore and admire. A corrupt papacy, but he's great patron of the arts. He begins to employ the greatest artists and architects of the time.
During Borgia's papal rule, the Castle St. Angelo is restored. A center for the University of Rome is built, and Michelangelo draws plans to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica. Borgia commissions so many works of art in the name of God and his family that the image modern Christianity has come to associate with Jesus Christ is said to be modeled after his oldest son, Cesare. The umbrella of modern Christianity includes over 800 million Protestants and 1.2 billion Catholics worldwide.
It's this idea of the papacy being the rock, a source of permanence in an age of anxiety that people know is steady.
In the Gospels, when the apostles go fishing in Galilee, Peter is told, "You are Peter," which means rock. "And on this rock I will build my church, and I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven."
Jesus said to Peter, "You are the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church."
Against all odds, in the face of all that has threatened his reign, 2,000 years after the death of St. Peter, the Pope remains at the head of one of the most powerful institutions on earth.